Dimensions of the Daf with Rabbi Mordechai Becher on JBS is made possible in part by the B.L. Manger Foundation in memory of Ben Manger.
Hi, I am Rabbi Mordechai Becher, and welcome to Dimensions of the Daf with the Jewish Broadcasting Service. I know it's hard to believe, but in Israel we are actually looking at the onset of spring. Not quite yet, another month and a half or so, but the first manifestation of springtime in Israel is when the first buds appear on the almond tree. People are probably familiar with the Israeli song Shkedi Porachat, etc., where the almond tree blossoms first. Actually, it's interesting, almond in Hebrew is shaked or shkedia. Shaked also is used as the Hebrew term for someone who is diligent, enthusiastic, and quick to do something, shaked. And the reason such a person is called shaked is based on the almond tree blossoming or budding first in the season. So if we look at the first slide, which is the first Mishnah in Tractate Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah means the new year. So, of course, as you probably know, the secular world just celebrated the new year, January, about a month ago. However, the Jews, we don't just have one new year, we have four. So the Mishnah says 4 new years. Arba Rosh Hashanim Haim, there are 4 new years. What are they? Be'echad b'Nisan, on the 1st of Nisan, that's the month in which Passover falls. Rosh Hashanah limlachim v'lirgalim. There is a Rosh Hashanah, a new year, for kings and for festivals. Let me explain briefly what that means. In those times, when they dated a document, legal documents, it was not dated back to creation. It was dated based on the year of the king's reign. So let's say King Lancelot becomes king in the 2 months before Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first day of the month of Nisan, he becomes king. If you write a document 3 months later, you will write second year of King Lancelot, because the year changes on that date. And obviously, it's important to know in a document the precise time. As you can imagine, if it's a loan document and I took out a loan and then subsequent to the loan I sold land, that land could be under a lien or a mortgage to that loan, which means the creditor could collect it from you. If the sale of the land took place before the loan, then the creditor has no rights on that land, there's no lien, there's no mortgage, etc., because it took place before the loan. So consequently, it is of great importance to know precisely when the documents are, as anyone who's done any business will know, and consequently that's how it works in ancient Israel, that the year of the king, even if it was only a king for a month, when it comes to the beginning of this month of Nisan, boom, year 2. It's now considered year 2. So it's a new year of kings. Secondly, it's a new year for festivals. But what festivals? Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, Regalim. Those are the 3 festivals, pilgrimage festivals, when people would go to Jerusalem every year. What's the significance of that? Well, we know that, maybe you don't, but you'll know soon, when you make a vow to bring an offering to the temple, in the days that we had a temple, so there are obligatory offerings that are brought communally and individually, and there are also voluntary offerings where anyone can make a vow, I would like to offer this to the temple. Now, the Torah says you must fulfill the words of that vow, and it says you must not be late in paying your vow. So what is late? Late varies. So what's the legal definition of that vow being late? So the Talmud says if 3 festivals, Pesach, Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot, have passed by in that order, and you have not brought it, you're late, and then you've transgressed. So it must be Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot in that order, and the month and Pesach must be first. Hence, Nisan, the month of Passover, is the first of months for the festivals. Then we are told on the first of Elul is the Rosh Hashanah of tithing animals. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon say on the first of Tishrei. As you probably know here as well, although not everyone's involved in animal husbandry, but you should be aware that animals tend to give birth around the same time. In other words, there's a season. So, you have a flock of sheep or a herd of cattle, you'll probably be aware that they're in heat during the same season, they mate around the same time, and they all give birth around the same time. So there's an argument whether it's the first of Elul or a month later, the first of Tishrei. Either way, in Israel, biblical law requires that let's say you have 10 lambs are born into your flock that year, so 1 out of 10 goes to the temple, to the Kohanim, to the priests. So that's called Ma'aser, tithing. So in the same way as the IRS has tax years, and there's a cutoff date for the tax year. What is it, April 15th, something like that, right? But there's a cutoff date. So also in Israel, biblical Israel, halacha, Jewish law says there's a tax cutoff point for that year and the next year, and it's different for different crops or different tithes. So for the tithes of animals, it's on that date. And then we say the first of Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah. For years, as we all know, that is the Rosh Hashanah that most people are familiar with who have not watched Dimensions of the Daf. The rest of humanity, the 99% of ignorant humanity, will only be familiar with one Rosh Hashanah, which is this one that we're talking about, the first of Tishrei. That's the New Year of Years, meaning it's now 5/7, whatever it is, 5/7, 5/6, and the next year the year changes at that date. Shmitin, meaning sabbatical year. This year actually is the sabbatical year in Israel. It's called Shemitah. It's a year where you're not supposed to plant, you're only supposed to sustain crops but not to improve them, and so on and so forth. Many, many ramifications in Jewish law. That starts on what the traditional Rosh Hashanah. Yovlot means the Jubilee year, every 50 years. That is no longer observed. L'Netziah, planting. When you plant a tree, you cannot eat from the fruit of that tree for the first 3 years. So the definition, the year switches at Tishrei. Liyarakot, vegetables, and for vegetable that means taking the tithes from vegetables. Be'echad b'Shvat, Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan, on the first day of Shvat, is the New Year of Trees, Kedivrei Beit Shammai, according to Beit Shammai. Beis Hillel Omrim, the house of Hillel, say, B'chamisha Asar Ba, on the 15th of Shvat, or what's known in Hebrew as Tu B'Shvat. It's the New Year of Trees. What does it mean, the New Year of Trees? Very simply, it's a technicality. It's a legal issue, which is that when you have trees in Israel, you must give tithes from the crop of those trees, from the fruit that you harvest. Again, there's a cutoff point of giving tithes from last year, this year. The cutoff point is Tu B'Shvat, 15th of Shvat. So initially, it was not a festival. There was no celebration. It's just like if you're a farmer, then you have to know this date in order to know that, okay, I have to bring the tithes for the previous year by this date, and next date I start counting the crops for the next year, and then I'll bring tithes for the next year at that point. So that's really what Tu B'Shvat is about. Later on in history, it took on a little more significance for other reasons. Kabbalists in Tzfat in the 16th century, 17th century established it as a bit of a festival. They established the custom of eating the fruits of the land of Israel. Israel's blessed with 7 species, which the Torah mentions. Of course, Israel's blessed with many more species nowadays, but the 7 classic species which Israel's blessed with are olives and grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, grapes, figs, pomegranate, dates, and wheat and barley. And all of these actually grow wild in Israel. There's actually a couple of places in Israel where within the space of a few hundred square feet, you can actually see all 7 of these things growing wild. There's one place in Tzfat in the north of Israel, another place I know of in the Jerusalem forest, right next to the suburb of Har Nof in Jerusalem. There are probably other places as well, but these are species the land of Israel is blessed with, so it became a custom to eat fruit of the land of Israel. The Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, the great Kabbalist, said that the fruit of Israel is holy. And so when you eat it, there's a certain holiness which is imbued by the fruits of Israel. Other of the Kabbalists talked about it also as a time of praising God for having given us the land of Israel and the beauty of that land, the blessing of that land, and the appreciation of that land, all included in Tu B'Shvat. My father of blessed memory told me that when he lived in Poland, he remembers from when he was a child in the 1920s and 30s that his father used to arrange a crate of oranges to be brought in from Israel to Poland, because there were Jews already living in Israel producing citrus fruits, and they used to have a crate of oranges from Israel sent to their house in Poland, which is quite something, and that's how they celebrated Tu B'Shvat. Technically, if you'll look at the next slide, the Talmud points out what is the significance of that date. In other words, why that date and not any other date? Why is the 15th of Shvat chosen as that date for the New Year of Trees? He says because, and this is true in Israel, we're not talking about the rest of the world, but in Israel, most of the rain that will have fallen that winter has fallen by Tu B'Shvat, which means, what does that mean? That means that the tree, which absorbs the nutrients and the water, the rain, etc., and stores it in its sap, has pretty much everything it needs to produce fruit, except for sunlight. So when you come out to the field on Tu B'Shvat, for example, and you see a bud on the tree, no fruit, no flower, just a little bud on the tree, that bud, it's like, Nachmanides points out, it's like you are seeing a complete fruit, because you see all the nutrients and the water is already in the trunk of that tree. All it needs is the sunlight for that bud to grow into a fruit. So even though you harvest the fruit in summer, a couple of months later, nevertheless, it's considered to be fruit from the previous year. Why? Because it is growing based on the rain, the nutrients, the sap of that previous year. This is true when it comes to fruits of the tree. This is not true regarding vegetables. Vegetables, herbs, and grasses, etc., tithes are taken from them as soon as when they're completely ready to eat. The reason is because the nutrients, the water, and everything else is not really stored up in the vegetable or in the herb. It immediately goes into the vegetable or herb, the fruit, and is utilized immediately. So trees are basically storing up stuff, bringing it out later when the sunlight comes in summer, and they produce that fruit. Whereas with vegetables, it's pretty much, it's not that you see a little thing like that, that's the whole vegetable's already there. No, it still requires more water, more nutrients, etc., because it doesn't store it up. This is why if you look in Psalms, Psalm 92, which I believe is on your slide, Psalm 92, we are told that evil people are compared to grass, yatzitzu resha'im kemo esev, and righteous people are compared to a date palm. Tzaddik katamar yifrach, the righteous shall flower like a date palm. The commentaries point out, why is it that a righteous person compared to a fruit tree and an evil person compared to grass or herbs or vegetables? And the answer is very simple, based on what we just mentioned. The evil person only thinks of the here and now, does not think of the consequences, does not think of a long term, does not think of the longue durée, does not think of the future and the world to come, only here and now. Whereas the righteous person, like a tree, stores, waits, keeps the potential there, brings it out at appropriate times, appropriate places, and appropriate situations. This is also why, where we have in the book of Job, Job refers to the days of youth as Yemei Churfi, which literally means the days of winter. In Western culture, we generally in literature, in poetry, and in our speech, we refer to old age usually as winter, and youth as summer or spring. So youth is summer or spring, old age is winter. In Jewish terminology, old age is summer, and youth is winter. That is interesting distinction. Why is it so? So I heard from my teacher that the reason is the following. It's based on this tree and vegetable type idea. If your idea of the purpose of life is consumption, the here and now, how much I can enjoy life here and now, then when can I do most consumption? When I'm young. So youth is harvest time. That's when I'm harvesting. I'm consuming, I'm eating, etc., etc. And I mean consumption in a broader term than just eating, but it's time of consumption, i.e. it's a time of harvest. And therefore, in youth is called summer, because it's harvest time. When are you less able to consume? When are you now dormant and less active and less consumption? Old age. So old age is winter. In Jewish tradition, we look at it a little differently. Youth is the time that I'm absorbing the nutrients. I am building myself physically, spiritually, morally, intellectually. But when will I harvest the fruits of that investment? So I believe that the fruits of that investment are when we see children, our children who are decent human beings, when we see grandchildren who are decent human beings. So when do we see this? That's in old age. So old age is when I'm harvesting the fruits and the investments of youth. So therefore youth we refer to as winter, because that's when the rain comes down, I'm storing up the rain, the sap, the nutrients, and so on and so forth. When do I harvest those things that I stored up in youth? I harvest them when I'm old. And therefore, old age is referred to as summer, because that's when we harvest. And that's a very beautiful distinction between those two concepts and the two ways in which we look at summer, winter, harvest, youth, etc. And this is based on this concept of Tu B'Shvat and of the difference between the tree and the vegetable, as Nachmanides points out. In Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah refers to this concept of a slightly different aspect of the tree and of winter and the seasons. So Isaiah says the following: however disconsolate the abandonment on earth may appear, the tithe remains, meaning there's always something. So he's telling us that I have to look at that and I have to understand that beneath that snow there is grass which is waiting to blossom as soon as it's exposed to sunlight. Not grass doesn't blossom, but grass to grow. When I look at that tree, I understand that there is life and potential in that tree, which is just waiting for the sun to come out. Even if it may be destroyed again and again, like the oak and the beech trees, which retain their stem while losing their leaves and twigs. So Isaiah tells us, yeah, you look at the oak tree and you look at the beech tree, you look at various trees, they may lose limbs, they may lose branches, they certainly lose their leaves, but they're not dead, and they'll grow again. And he says, so also his stem, the stem of God, so to speak, remains for the future sanctuary. Isaiah is comparing the Jewish people in exile to winter. And he's saying you might look at the exile of the Jews, and certainly one could be excused if throughout history someone looked at the Jews just after the first crusade in Germany, in the Rhineland, 30,000 Jews in the Rhineland, Worms, Mayence, Spires, and 5,000 of them killed by the Crusaders. So if you'd look at that, you'd see winter. Desolation, dead trees, no leaves, snow on the ground. And you would not imagine that that could come to life again, but it did. And the Jews in post-Crusade 1096, post-Crusade Germany, produced an amazing culture of piety, of wisdom, of mysticism, of Talmudic commentary, of halacha, of poetry, of prayers. Amazingly, they came to life again. So Isaiah says when we come to this time of year, so to speak, like Tu B'Shvat period, so Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch quotes Isaiah as saying, he says, that's how we have to look at life as well. You could have periods where it appears to be there's no leaves on the tree and the limbs are falling off and it's terrible, but you have to know that there's always potential inside for the growth. It just needs the appropriate sunlight at a certain time. Hasidic commentaries point out this is true of looking at other people, right? When you look at another person and say this person is a hopeless loser, that's wrong. Rav Nachman of Breslov says you have to look at the other person as a tree. Right now, he is in winter. Right now, he doesn't have leaves. Right now, it's not looking very good, but he's not dead, which means he can grow, and it just needs the appropriate sunlight. The appropriate sunlight might be your kindness, might be your smile, might be your money. Who knows? There may be many ways of having sunlight shine on a person to bring out the fruit for the future. Two more points about this I just wanted to point out that there's in the Song of Songs also, we have a very beautiful verse, and we've discussed this extensively in a class a couple of years ago, actually. I'm sure you'll remember it word for word, or you've taken notes, correct? Okay, good. Where it says in Song of Songs that God tells the Jewish people in Egypt, "Arise, my beloved, my beautiful one, because the time has come, the winter has passed, the rain is over and gone, the flowers appear on the earth, time for singing has arrived, and the voice of the turtle dove is heard in our land." And here the Kabbalists point out that what it tells us is that there's something in spring. Spring is the time of redemption, not because we got out of Egypt in springtime. Rather, we got out of Egypt in springtime because springtime is the time of redemption. In other words, there's a certain energy built in to different times of the year, times of the month, times of the day, and we believe that every moment has its own specific holiness and sanctity. And the sanctity of spring, the holiness, the energy of spring is the time of redemption. And that manifests itself in the physical world with the budding of plants and the opening of flowers and so on and so forth, and the thaw of the snow. It manifests itself in history by the Jews getting out of Egypt, by the Jews crossing the Jordan from the desert into the land of Israel. It manifests itself with Purim, when the Jews were saved from annihilation at the hands of Haman in Babylon, and it manifests itself in many different ways throughout history. So that is the idea, and hence we mark Tu B'Shvat only very minimally. It's two ways in which we mark it. We don't say Tachanun, which is a prayer, a sad prayer of penitence, contrition, and repentance, which we say every day, except we don't say it on Shabbat, we don't say it on festivals, we don't say it on happy occasions. And secondly, it is customary for people to eat the fruits of the land of Israel. Some people even have, many Hasidic communities, they have a whole Seder, almost like a ritual, like a Passover Seder, but less to do with surrounding the fruit of the land of Israel. I just wanted to end with 10 or 9 or 10 ideas about trees, mitzvot associated with trees. Number one, as we said, is Tu B'Shvat, and the cutoff time of the tithes from fruit of the trees, which is at this time of year. Number 2 and 3 is not allowed to plant a tree together with wheat, barley, and grains. Like you cannot mix wool and linen, you cannot mix meat and milk, you cannot mix grapevines and grains, or trees and grains. And it's not clear what the reason for these prohibitions are. Some authorities say there's no reason that we can possibly know. They are called chukim, meaning laws which are intrinsic to the nature, spiritual nature of the world, and the reasons are absolutely beyond us. Others maintain it's a way of our showing, by respecting those boundaries, natural boundaries of the world, we're saying that just as there are boundaries of nature, there are also moral boundaries. There are spiritual, ethical boundaries. And so those are also part of the world, the structure of the world. And in the same way that I cannot ignore gravity, and I cannot ignore the laws of species, and I cannot ignore the laws of biology and physics and so on and so forth, I can also not ignore the laws of ethics and morality and the laws of holiness and the laws of the Torah. So by respecting these boundaries, we're respecting our idea of all boundaries. Then there's also prohibition of orla, not to eat from the tree for the first 3 years, fruit from the tree, first 3 years of its growth. I guess it teaches us patience, but it also teaches us, may have ecological factors, allow the tree to develop fully before you actually use the fruit, and then you are allowed to use the fruit after that year. Bikurim, the first fruits. In ancient Israel, when the farmer goes out to the field, the first time he sees a fruit, it doesn't have to have a drone do a search of the field, but the first one he notices, he ties a ribbon on that particular branch, and then he knows when it comes close to Shavuot, he will pick that fruit and take the first fruits of each crop and put it in a basket, and he goes to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was adorned with flowers. The whole city was decorated for this festival, and people would come from all over Israel with the first fruits of their crops and bring them to the temple. A very, very beautiful thing. We commemorate that. Our synagogues, on Shavuot, we decorate with flowers. It's a very common custom to decorate the shul with flowers on Shavuot, and this is one of the reasons for that. There is also the law of Ma'aser, taking tithes from the fruit of the tree, even though according to biblical law, you only take tithes from the species, from olives and grapes and grains, but rabbinic law requires from all fruits of the tree. Lo tashchit. Here's an interesting one. This is a law where the Torah mentions that when you besiege a city, there's a war, you're besieging a city, you should not destroy the fruit-bearing trees of that city. That apparently was a standard component of warfare, was slash and burn. Burning the crops, you demoralize the people in the city when they see their crops being destroyed. You use wood of the trees for ammunition and for fuel and so on and so forth. So the Torah says, no, we should restrain ourselves, do not destroy the fruit-bearing trees. And this prohibition was expanded later to include any type of destruction that was unnecessary, any type of wasteful behavior. So yeah, reduce and recycle and reuse, very important ideas, because as the Sefer HaChinuch says, a good person appreciates everything they have. And wasting things, destroying things, not making any effort to reduce one's consumption really shows a lack of value for these things, a lack of appreciation for these blessings, and a lack of appreciation for life. And so therefore there's a prohibition called lo tashchit, don't destroy. And there is also a beautiful blessing which we make on trees. When you see a fruit-bearing tree and you see the first buds, the first flowers on that tree, there's a special blessing we make. Blessed are you, our God, King of the universe, who created beautiful trees and beautiful creatures and a beautiful world for the benefit of humanity. Blessed are you, our God, that your world is so wonderful. And finally, there's a prohibition against planting a tree next to the altar in the temple. And some say that is based on the fact that the ancient inhabitants of Canaan used to worship a goddess called Ashtart, and the tree was one of the things they used to worship, type of like druids in some sense, and hence we do not plant trees as decoration in the temple. The temple is unadorned by trees. Trees were utilized by idolaters in that way. So those are some of the commandments and laws involving trees. A little bit of some of the insights into the laws and philosophy of Tu B'Shvat, and some other aspects that we can learn from the change of seasons, winter to spring, death to life, and hopefully we can all learn those lessons for our own life as well. The storing up of potential, not for the here and now, but for the future. The idea of not giving up hope in ourselves or anyone else, for that matter, as long as there is life, and bringing sunshine and on the potential so that people will be able to grow that great fruit. And of course, the idea of every time having its own energy and sanctity, and these 10 laws surrounding trees. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching the Jewish Broadcasting Service. Dimensions of the Daf. I am Mordechai Becher, and hope that you'll tune in future. And you can also buy my book. People remember books, those things made of trees, Gateway to Judaism, and hope you see me and I see you in future. Thank you very much for watching.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.